Whether you're planning to fly business class to Europe this year, or maybe you just want to go to that family reunion in Missouri and get a inexpensive hotel, unless you're planning to pay the full cash price, you're going to need points and miles to do it. Hi everybody, Dugras here with Dugras Reports. Today, I'm going to reveal to you my war chest of points as we head into 2024. I'll go over how many points I have in each of the major ecosystems and a few others, and I'll drop a few ideas for how I think I might use those points. Well, let's dive in. Let's start with Chase Ultimate Rewards. As of January 1st, 2024, I have 301,900 points. By the way, I will be rounding to the nearest 100 points. And there are some cards that are pending and I expect to close within the next few days. I'll list those here on the screen. I won't read them off to you individually. But between myself and player 2, we have 409,000 Chase Ultimate Rewards. One good use for Chase Ultimate Rewards that helps me out is transferring to Air Canada Aeroplan. Right now, there's a 20% bonus moving your points from Chase to Aeroplan. And since I have the Aeroplan credit card, I can pay myself back with a 1.25 modifier. Once you factor in that 20% bonus, as well as the automatic 10% bonus that comes every time you transfer at least 50,000 points, that effectively means I can pay myself back for travel at a rate of 1.625 cents per point. I'm planning to take my family to Washington, D.C. this summer, so I'll use that Aeroplan card for things like Ubers, trains, buses, any sort of general travel that it's hard to use points for. That kind of thing really comes in handy so you don't have to use cash. Next, we'll take a look at American Express membership rewards. Amex makes it real easy on you. They just tell you how many points that you have and they post your account fairly promptly. So we're looking at 148,000 for myself, 277,000 for my wife. Add it together, you've got 425,900 Amex points. Now, if you had looked at my wife's total just a few days ago, you would have seen 402,365 points, about 125,000 more. Well, that's because shortly before 2023 ended, I transferred 125,000 of her Amex points to Hilton. And the logic there is there was a transfer bonus at that time. Instead of the normal 1-to-2 ratio, it was a 1-to-2.6 ratio. As for an idea for how I plan to use membership rewards, you can transfer your Amex points to British Airways and use that to book domestic American flights. I've got one in mind in business class for the entire family of 4. Will cost 82,000 Avios, and I'll move those over from Amex points. And that'll get me a very respectable 1.9 cents per point to get my family to Washington, D.C. in style. I said business class, but since it's domestic, it'll count as first class. Before we go any further, I just want to mention that on this particular YouTube channel, I talk about finding epic value, including, but not limited to, credit card rewards for the average American. If that sounds interesting to you, please subscribe to the channel and please click the thumbs up button. If you're already a subscriber, consider becoming a member, a Dugras diehard. It only costs $3 a month and you can cancel anytime. I've already got somewhere around 15 videos up that are members only. These are generally videos that are either too nerdy for the general public or too sensitive and don't play well in the YouTube algorithm. Next up, we have thank you points from Citi. And I have at present 69,900 Citi thank you points. The reason why there's two different accounts displayed, they're both mine, is I simply haven't been able to merge my newest Citi card, which is a custom cash, into my other two existing cards, including a Citi Premier and a Rewards Plus. And I called Citi yesterday, and their customer service was a little shaky, so that's kind of a strike against Citi. But regardless, they do have some pretty awesome redemptions. Hopefully, that'll get merged real soon. There are also 2,300 points pending, which brings us to a total of 72,200 points. As for how I might use some of those Citi points, you can transfer your Citi points over to Choice Hotels at a ratio of 1 to 2. So I have my eye on this Cambria Hotel, which looks very nice in Washington, D.C. This won't be our main stay. I'll get to that later in the video, but it could be a stay where we go for 1 or 2 nights after showing up at the airport. A 1 king bed suite is 25,000 points per night, which means I only need to transfer 12,500 Citi points. And at the rate you see on screen here, that works out to 2.4 cents per point. Let's take a look at Capital One miles. So I currently have almost 178,000 Capital One miles. No need to worry about pending points because Capital One is kind enough to post those miles to your account almost immediately. As for a potential use, you can send your Capital One miles over to Flying Blue, which is the rewards program for Air France and KLM. You can use those Flying Blue miles to book domestic flights on Delta, often at a rate better than what you can use Delta's own miles for. Here's an example where I could fly from Minneapolis to the airport in New Orleans, Louisiana, on the same weekend as the Creator meetup over Labor Day, this coming August into September. And that would be 14,500 Flying Blue miles, which I could move over from a variety of places, including Capital One. And based on what the cash rate is at present, that would get a value of 1.7 cents per point. Next up, Wells Fargo rewards. And I currently have a little over 121,000 with Wells Fargo. And there are 2,800 points pending, which means I have 124,700 Wells Fargo points in my war chest. As for an example, I have no idea. When Wells Fargo tells us who the transfer partners are, I'll tell you how I'm going to use them. Moving on, we next have US Bank points. And the only point earning card I have with US Bank is the Altitude Reserve, which is currently sitting at a little over 14,000 points with 1,600 pending, giving me a war chest of 15,800 points. I'd like to build those points up a little bit because I plan to use that when I fly to Virginia in April to get my rental car. Currently, that's running somewhere around $258. So I'll need to build that balance up a little bit. But if I'm able to, I can use just over 17,000 US Bank points. And when you pay yourself back for travel, it's at a fixed rate of 1.5 cents per point. The Altitude Reserve also has primary car rental insurance coverage, and it gets me a few statuses with rental car companies. Although it does not directly with Enterprise, I have matched my status from Avis over to Enterprise or something along those lines, and I do have status with Enterprise now. So hopefully I'll be able to skip the counter and go directly out to the parking lot and pick up my car. Next up, we're ready to move on to proprietary points, and I'll start with my Hilton collection. So here you see the numbers on the screen. Between my wife and I, we have 560,000 Hilton points. I have gold status. She doesn't have any kind of status, so it makes sense to move points from her name to mine. I will do that soon, just haven't quite yet. And then I'll make a booking. I do have a specific booking in mind. One great thing about Hilton is if you're in 2-player mode or more than 2-player mode, once you've had your account open for, I think, 60 days, you can combine points, which is amazing, and not all programs let you do that. So thumbs up in that regard, Hilton. You'll remember earlier on the Amex section, I mentioned transferring 125,000 Amex points. that became 325,000 Hilton points, which is reflected in my wife's total. As for the redemption, I've got one in mind. We're planning to stay at the Embassy Suites in Washington, D.C., and that would normally cost over $5,000 at that time of year in early July for a 5-night stay. Well, I can't afford that, but I can handle 80,000 points per room per night. And remember, I'm going to need 2 rooms because I've got myself, my wife, plus 2 teenagers. So if you do the math on that, that comes out to 320 Hilton points for each room over the 5 nights because we get the 5th night free. And that locks in at 1.6 cents per point. If you think about the fact that I transferred over my Amex points at a ratio of 2.6, on the Amex side, that is a stellar 4.1 cents per point. If anyone ever says it's not worth transferring your Amex points to Hilton, just have them take a look at this. Next up, we're going to take a look at my collection of IHG points. And again, my wife and I both have IHG points, and this is where it sits right now. When we total those together, that's 191,700 IHG points. What do I have in mind for the IHG points? Well, a few different things, but my favorite example is that when I fly to Charlottesville, Virginia, the first night I get in late, like at 11:30 p.m., there is an airport Staybridge Suites. I've already reserved this, and it would normally be $332, but instead I'm going to use 40,000 IHG points. In terms of the cents per point, this is not even considering 4th night free. That comes in at 0.83 cents per point. Remember that IHG points can be purchased for half a cent each pretty frequently. So if you're just buying the points, that represents 66% more value. We got most of our IHG points through sign-up bonuses on the credit cards, as well as just natural spend. We'll take a look at my collection of Wyndham points. I do have the Wyndham business credit card, and there's my current balance, and that adds up to 104,100 points. As for the redemption that I have in mind, really the only thing that I regularly use Wyndham points is stays with Vacasa, and Vacasa is a competitor to Vrbo or Airbnb vacation rentals. Here's an example of a place in Annapolis, Maryland called The Little House, and it's a beautiful little house. You can get the entire house, and this is a 2-bedroom place right in downtown Annapolis next to the Naval Academy and all the things that you might want to see. If you were paying cash, it would be almost $1,800 for a 3-night stay and would include things like state tax, occupancy tax, sales tax, a damage waiver, a cleaning fee. Well, guess what? If you're using your Wyndham points, you don't have to pay any of those things. You just pay points. It comes out to 15,000 points per bedroom per night. And if you have any of the Wyndham credit cards, you get a 10% discount. So in this case, I would need to use 81,000 Wyndham points to book those 3 nights, and that would come out to 2.2 cents per point. Although I have enough points to handle it right now, I would also like to mention that you can transfer from Citi and Capital One to get Wyndham points. Let's take a peek at my Air Canada Aeroplan stash. I mentioned that earlier in the context of Chase. I already have 85,000 Aeroplan miles, and that's worth $1,073 in pay yourself back with that 1.25 modifier. Since we already talked about how I use that pay yourself back feature, I won't go into any additional detail on that one. And then another thing worth mentioning briefly is cash. I do keep a distinct savings account just for my travel savings funds. I currently have that with Charles Schwab. Some of it is in a money market, some of it is in cash, and that totals up to right around $1,500. This is constantly increasing and decreasing as I pay for things, including annual fees out of it, and as I get cashback rewards from credit cards, bank account bonuses, etc. So it does fluctuate, but that's where it's sitting right now. I do have a mishmash of some other points and miles programs. I have a little under $300 in Delta certificates from using the airline credit on my business platinum. I have over 120,000 flying blue points right now because of a booking that I made and then canceled. I bought an Airbnb gift card a couple years ago, and I've still got $560 of that left. I've got around 20,000 choice points. I've got almost $500 in airline credits with Southwest, and then I've got just under 6,000 points with Hyatt sitting in my Hyatt bank of points right now. I'm not going to give examples for all of those. Those are mostly either mistakes, cancellations, changing my mind, or just using credits that I had to use, but somehow I'll use those someday, hopefully. Here's a bar graph showing the points I've scored. I shouldn't say scored because this isn't how many I earned last year. I did a separate video on that. If you want to see my earnings in 2023, I'll put a link up top and down below. But if you just want to compare across the board how many I have in each category, I did use a rate of times 100 to move the decimal on cash to make the comparison make sense. Obviously, Hilton's in the lead, and I realize Hilton's not worth the same as Chase and Amex, but it does give you sort of a good general overview of what I have in my war chest that I can pull out and use for redemptions. So if you want to know the grand total and add all of those together, that comes out to 2.3 million points that I have in my war chest. Please put your comments down below and questions for me. What do you think about that? Share your own point stash. And as always, may your spending be frugal and may your points be plenteous.